Parquet. Public hearing on Zone Text Amendment 18-2. Should I wait and talk about that?
Yes, we will open that for comment
All
when
right.
that item comes up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else care to address the commission? All right, with that, I will close the open communication period. We will move on the agenda to the consent calendar, approval of September 17th, 2018 minutes. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, please vote, everybody. Passes unanimously, so the consent calendar passes. Thank you. Okay, continued items, we have none, and scheduled matters, we have none. So moving to new business, item number 1, minor use permit 18-9, 350 12th Street. Staff, Director Landavazo, do we have a staff report?
Yes, Mr. Fowler will be giving the report for this item.
Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you, Director, Chairman, and fellow commissioners. Item 2 this evening is at 350 12th Street, minor use permit 18-9, to allow the replacement of a staircase on an existing multifamily residence that is non-conforming due to density and parking in the residential high-density Zone 20 area. The property is located on 12th Street, surrounded by residential units. Across the street is Zoder Field. It is in the Old Town area. Due to the nonconformity, sorry for the blurry picture, but due to the nonconformity of the 4 units here at the location and only having 2 parking spaces instead of the required 8, it's required to have a minor use permit be approved for the replacement of the staircase here in the front of the property. As you can see here, this is the proposed staircase that goes to the one of the upper units. It's similar in nature. It's in-like to the existing staircase. Nothing's really going to change except that it's become deteriorated and they need a new staircase there. I have not received any correspondence regarding this project. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
All right, thank you, Steve. Does anyone have any questions for staff? All right, I'll do it. Let's open this for public comment. Anyone have anything they'd like to ask about this item on the agenda?
Good evening, Chair Thomas and Vice Chair Klinger, and members of the Commission. I'm sorry I've had laryngitis, but I'm here tonight representing DLC, which are the petitioners.
Would you mind stating your name just for the record?
Oh, yes, certainly. My name is Elaine Hutchison, and I'm here this evening on behalf of DLC, which are the petitioners for this project. We do appreciate your hearing and we urge your support. The reason for changing this is that in the old stairs, a lady fell, and so we just don't want to have that happen again. So we would appreciate your support. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Hutchison, is that right?
Yes.
Oh, does anyone have any
I'd be happy to
questions?
answer any questions if you have any.
I don't think we have any questions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have any statement to make on this item? All right, so I will close the comment period. And is there any commissioner questions, discussion, motions?
So moved.
I'd like to say thank you for being proactive on making it a safer staircase.
Sure. Thank you, Robert.
I'll second.
Okay, let's vote. And it passes unanimously. All right, so Ms. Grayson.
There is a 10-day appeal period from this decision, and the appeal period starts running tomorrow.
All right, thank you very much, Amy. Okay, moving on to item 2, minor use permit 18-10, 114 Ocean Avenue, Director Landavazo, do we have a staff report?
Yes, Mr. Fowler will be giving the report.
Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you, Director, Chairman, and fellow commissioners. Item 3 is to allow the construction of a 10-foot tall retaining wall, 60-foot long, to allow the construction of a single-family residence on a property located in the residential low-density RLD 9 zoning area, also known as the Gold Coast, here off of Ocean Avenue. The property is surrounded by residential uses, the beach to the south. It's over here between First and Second Street. We are here looking at a minor use permit this evening because it's required. Anything over 30 inches within the Gold Coast area requires a minor use permit to be approved for any retaining walls over that. The applicant is looking at putting a 60-foot retaining wall along this area right on this side. This is the street side, so this is the east side of the property, so here along the west side. And the reason for that is there's habitable space that is below on what's called the basement level here, or the beach level of this proposed unit. Right here is a bedroom, a bathroom, and then a living room or family room area. In order to meet certain building codes, you're required to have egress out of a bedroom. So the retaining wall would start in this area and go this way. Otherwise, the current terrain comes down along this area, and it wouldn't allow for this area to be habitable as a bedroom. On top of that 10-foot retaining wall, which will then be right at grade level up in this portion, and next door there will be a 5-foot tall retaining or garden wall. The code also says that it can only be a total of 10 feet tall, but as per our measurement, as in the staff report, we only measure retaining walls at the midpoint. So it's typically only half of the height of the retaining walls. So with the 5-foot on top and then the halfway point, that totals 10 feet total. We have not received any correspondence with this, and with that, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Commissioners, do we have any questions of staff? I have one question, and that is, do we, so as a civil engineer, do we allow architects to sign grading plans that come through the city for staff review?
The grading plans are reviewed by the Public Works Department. I don't believe that it's architects that sign off on those plans, but I would have to check with the engineering department to confirm that.
Well, I was just curious because the grading plan that's submitted as part of this is stamped by an architect. Now, I know this isn't a very exciting wall or anything like that, but I was just curious if we had the city had like a policy or anything written in our codes about that.
The engineering department definitely has their standards. At this point, I believe what they did is because they knew they had to come to the planning commission first, they probably just had their architect put this together for them. They still need to submit for formal plan check with their grading plans for that portion.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any other questions? So this will go through a full Public Works review and all that kind of.
Absolutely.
All right, very good. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open this for public comment. We are open for public comment. Would anyone like to make a statement on this project or have any comment? Is the applicant here? Would you like to come forward and speak? You don't have to. It's up to you.
My name is Eric Mossman. I'm the architect for Jan and Derek Hudson at 114 Ocean Avenue. I'm a licensed architect, and as a licensed architect, I'm licensed to do grading plans on my own projects.
Oh, okay.
I'm allowed to do structural engineering, electrical, mechanical, and plumbing.
Wow.
I've been doing architecture in college for 49 years now. So the owners wanted to open up the basement more for another bedroom. And this is the only way we could do it. Now, if you go down the street on Ocean Avenue, you will find that almost every new house down there has that going on, the stairway going down from the front of the garage all the way down into the basement with some pretty tall retaining walls. Look like 10-foot tall retaining walls with 5 foot on top of, I guess it's on most of the homes built in the last 10 years, or that way. So the owner's just asking for approval on this. You won't see it from the street either.
No, I can see I know exactly what's going on. Yeah, I understand. I mean, this is nothing,
So if you have any questions,
is there any questions? No? Okay, I think we are okay, Mr. Mossman.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other comments? Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I'm still open. Does anyone else want to speak to this item? All right, so we're closing the open comment period. Any discussion or motion or by any?
It's beautiful.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, please vote. And it passes unanimously. All right, very good.
There is a 10-day appeal period from this decision, which starts running tomorrow.
All right, thank you, Amy. Okay, on to item 3, Zone Text Amendment 18-2 for all residential zones. And I'm going to ask Director Landavazo, do we have a staff report?
Yes, I do. So in December of 2016 and December of 2017, the City Council adopted an urgency ordinance and an extension of the urgency ordinance respectively, amending regulations for accessory dwelling units in residential zones throughout the city to comply with 2016 legislation, which was Assembly Bill 2299 and Senate Bill 1069. The purpose of that legislation was to increase the housing supply by facilitating the creation of accessory dwelling units. In late 2017, the state legislature amended this government code pursuant to Assembly Bill 494 and Senate Bill 229 to further restrict the ability of cities to regulate ADUs in order to increase the housing supply. The amendments place additional restrictions on cities' abilities to require parking for accessory dwelling units and expand the application of certain restrictions by modifying the definition of existing dwellings. This definition now includes proposed dwellings, where they're proposing a new single-family residence and a new ADU in the same set of plans. The urgency ordinance currently in place complies with the requirements of this government code section, as previously required by AB 2299 and SB 1069. Additional modifications were incorporated into the ordinance that is presented tonight to comply with AB 494 and SB 229. In general, all of these applications are going to have to be reviewed administratively by the planning department within 120 days of receipt. The location of these, the ordinance is going to allow that they're permitted in any RLD 9, RLD 15, RMD, RHD zone, with the exception of Old Town and Surfside Colony. Old Town and Surfside Colony are very congested areas within the city, as we're all familiar. There are limited on-site access and parking in these areas. They generally contain minimal 3-foot setbacks, less than the 5-foot setback minimum that is identified in the legislation itself. The minimal setbacks, combined with the built-up nature of the lots, the lack of adequate parking, this demonstrates that the lots within these areas would not be able to support the influx of new accessory dwelling units due to fire, access, parking, and traffic. The ordinance that's presented does have findings to identify that this is the case for these two areas within the city. Again, development standards are going to be applicable as much as they can be with regard to setback parking and height limitations. ADU parking requirements, there is rather specific restriction there in what the city is allowed to apply. The government code section now requires that parking for accessory dwelling units not exceed 1 parking space per unit or 1 per bedroom, whichever is less. The new legislation also restricts the city's ability to require these parking spaces be located within a garage, and provides that parking spaces may be provided as tandem on a driveway or in setback areas. The proposed ordinance also provides that if a garage is demolished in connection with the construction of an ADU or converted to an ADU, the replacement parking spaces may be located in any configuration on the same lot, including uncovered, covered, or tandem spaces by use of a mechanical auto parking lift. These two items are different from what our existing urgency ordinance requires currently. If you were going to be converting your garage or doing something that would affect the existing parking for the unit, we were requiring that you replace it with another garage on the property. We're no longer able to do that, and so the code was amended to identify that. Again, we are prohibited from requiring additional parking for accessory units when the ADU is located within a half-mile of public transit. The ADU is located in an architecturally or historically significant district. The ADU is part of a proposed or primary residence or an accessory structure where there is a car share vehicle within a block of the ADU, or the city requires on-street parking permits but does not offer the permits to the ADU occupant. Again, the zoning code will continue to restrict the accessory dwelling units to residential zones only. And again, many of the existing operational standards will remain consistent for ADUs, so there will be no separate sales of the ADU itself. The ADU itself may be rented, but it's prohibited from doing short-term rentals, so anything less than 30 days. Again, it must be located in a residential zone. It must be located on the same lot as a single-family residence. The size cannot exceed 50% of the existing residence with a max of 1,200 square feet. And the owner must occupy either the primary residence or the accessory dwelling unit on the property. So hopefully this gives you a general overview of what is being required of the city and how we're trying to comply with that, with the allowances that we were given by the restrictive state limitation that we have before us. And I can answer any questions that the commission has.
All right, thank you, Crystal. Thank you very much. Staff, do we have any questions? I mean,
Do you want to
sorry,
ask?
Commission.
You want commission to ask first, or you want to open the public hearing?
Well, we're going to have both periods of
Okay.
time, but if you have questions for staff, you can
Yeah,
ask them
I
now.
have just a couple questions. The first question is I read the standards, the additional dwelling unit has to be separated from the existing building, or can they actually be attached to the existing building?
It can be attached to the existing building, or they can take a portion of the existing building, separate it out, and convert that into an ADU.
Okay, because I thought there was a minimum standard of 6 feet between the two buildings, but am I reading that wrong on that chart?
If they're creating a new detached structure to serve as the ADU, then it has to have the 6-foot
Okay,
separation.
Okay. Then, of course, the second question is, how do you enforce the owner-occupied provisions down the road?
We would require a covenant to be provided so that the owner is required to live on the property.
Mm-hmm.
So that is sold with the property. So anyone purchasing it would have that same covenant on the property.
Okay,
Is that deed restricted?
yeah, that's what she's going to be doing.
Deed restricted, yeah.
So,
Okay, very good. Thank you,
Thank you.
Victor.
I had a quick question. So are these occupiable units only? So if somebody was to have, say, for example, one of these she sheds or some sort of attachment, or separate attachment in their yard that they use just for recreational purposes, is there a separation? Do they have to go through the same process if it's not occupiable, meaning that nobody's sleeping in there or using it as a rental unit or bedroom?
Right, it would have to be a dwelling unit. So there are definitions in there as to what makes it a dwelling unit. It would have to have a kitchen. It would have to be something that is habitable. An accessory structure like a storage shed or something along those lines that's not habitable wouldn't fall under this.
But if it's a recreate, say it's somebody's man cave and they put a bar in there and a sink and a bathroom, but they don't sleep out there, they don't have full occupancy, they use it for football games, does it cross that line into?
So what we do whenever we receive any types of plans, regardless of what somebody is calling it or labeling it, we'll take a look at what the current use or what the potential use is going to be for the space. So we get a lot of plans coming in where they're showing 4 bedrooms and then a media room, a den, something else. But if the media room and the den and these other areas have their own bathroom off to the side and there's potential for it either now or later or when it's sold 2 or 3 times down the road to be used as a bedroom, then we consider it a bedroom and they'll have to provide the parking and all of those things. So it depends on what the...
Case by case basis,
Yeah.
basically. Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Over in College Park East, and I believe it's on the Hill and College Park West, homes are not allowed to exceed 45% lot coverage. How does this impact that?
So lot coverage can still be enforced.
Crystal, could you speak into the mic, please?
Sure. Lot coverage is still one of the development standards that will be applicable under
Okay.
this ordinance.
Because we have in College Park East, two models that excessively exceed lot coverage, so much so that when they were first built, a couple years later, when people started trying to sell them, they couldn't get mortgages on them because FHA picked up on that, and the city council had to, quote, legalize these houses. And when you just redid Title 28 a couple years ago, when they talked about building a second story, these particular homes are not permitted to double deck, okay, because they have to stay, the second story has to stay within the 45% lot coverage. We went through some gyrations where if you wanted to add another bedroom to your home, you had to add another garage for one car. And of course, nobody can do that. Nobody can do that. We posed the issue that many of the two-story homes in College Park East have bonus rooms, and people can just simply put a wall down and create two more bedrooms, okay? And I posed this to Lee Wittenberg. I said, if I put a wall down, does that mean I've got to build a garage on my front lawn? And he said, why do you do this to me? And I said, you're trying to write a one-size-fits-all, and you can't do that in this city because we are too diverse. And so I look at this, and basically what they're looking at is granny flats, okay? That's what these are. And they basically said in here, because of the high density and the fact that everything is already so overdeveloped in Old Town and Surfside, you're excused right there. So this is going to fall to the residential areas of the Hill, College Park East, College Park West, to provide these. But when you've got backyards that are so small, how does one do that? I mean, it becomes, I know there's one house I'm thinking of where the guy in the other backyard built an add-on, and it came right to the setback. And the other person on the other side of it was just beside himself because now he's got this huge house right in his backyard. And it's technically not in his backyard, but I went over there and was like, holy cow, how did that happen? But it fell within it was allowed because it did not include the setbacks, went up to the setbacks. But, I look at these, and as I said, about lot coverage, because what got us into trouble with this was when SNS, we had about 20% of the tract was built, and SNS redid all the homes, and the lots were supposed to be 65 by 100. Guess what? They're 55 by 100. That's how those two one-stories got squirreled through. But when you look at this, I don't see how anybody can get anything in their backyards anymore. So we're hard-pressed, and yet they say in here, lot size, 50 by 100. It's a tough one.
It definitely is. It's one of those items where, again, the city took advantage of every provision that we were able to. And that's another item. In the last code, we were prohibiting providing any replacement parking in the setback areas, but the newer legislation no longer allows us to do that. So we tried to take advantage of whatever we were able to because we understand that the existing residential communities throughout the city are unique and they have their own identities, and we're trying to preserve it as much as we can. We just have our hands tied with this.
Well, one other thing, we were looking at this, several years ago, and one of the things we were told that in the state, in its desire to increase housing, because nobody wants to build it because they're putting all these restrictions on it, they said you would look to see, one of the things they may do is a two-story house that's on a corner. If it sells and they want to pull us off, they make the second story one unit and the bottom story another unit, and they can have a separate access to the second story because they're on a corner. And this will radically change a lot of our neighborhoods, because for many of us, parking is not all that great.
All right, thank you, Patty. Does anyone have any other questions or comments for staff before we open this for public comment? All right, we'll go ahead and do that now. We're opening up this item 18-2 for public comment. We encourage you to come forward and have your say.
I was here a year ago, and it was turned down.
Do you remember this?
And you're talking about, my name is Joyce Ross Parquet, Old Town Seal Beach. There is going to be your recommendation that there be a public hearing before you vote on this tonight?
This is the public hearing right now.
This is the public hearing right now. Okay. I was up here. I've been walking around town because of this election, and let me tell you what's happening. People are disgusted with the two-story houses that come all over the property. Now, some of the units in town, in Old Town, they don't come all over the property like these two-story houses coming up. So what are we going to do about those? They're just as bad as some of the units. And I know that you've turned down other units other than this, but I was not aware of the problems that Councilwoman Deaton did not want to take this on. But then instead, she took on Surfside. Old Town has just as many problems with their setbacks as Surfside, and it should have been both properties, Surfside and Old Town. Old Town, the units are valuable, just as valuable as those two-story lots that are what now? They're about 3,000 square feet. And you're talking about having bedrooms. The same problem is coming to Seal Beach that Huntington Beach is having now. How do you know where those units are, those safe houses for addictions, alcohol, or what else? How many are we going to allow in town? You're talking about units being bad. How many are we going to allow in town? So I'm just saying that I didn't know this was going to be the only planning commission meeting. But if you take a look at that picture, Councilman Gargis, because I've watched you on some of the other problems that have come up where people didn't want to go by. Well, these two here agreed. They said, hey, you can have that bathroom back there in the closet. And it was still open space. In 1922, nobody knew where the lot line was. And we have the same problems that Surfside have. There's a lot of problems here with lot lines. And let me tell you, the police, the fire department cannot get up and down in our alleys. They have to go on the street to get any fires out. They can't take those big trucks in the alleys. Have you seen any kind of truck trying to get through that alley? You stand there and you just scratch your head, even up there in the alley on Main Street. So we were turned down, and I went before the city council. And we were turned down with some silly thing about, well, you can't do that. It's against the zoning. A bathroom and a closet? Now, I saw you on TV take the problem with the little house over there on 8th Street and the other problem that that lady had with 2 units down on 12th Street. So there's got to be some people up here that can see that that house had more open space than any big house being built. And so I'm just going to have to go around town again and tell everybody that it's coming, that you denied before, they come back up here, and because we deserve what they withheld. It's not right. A bathroom and a closet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I just clarify also? besides the public hearing here, this will go to the city council. So you'll have an opportunity there also to comment.
Thank you, Amy.
Good evening, Robert Goldberg. I live in Bridgeport. And I have some comments and questions regarding whether there may be some more discretionary options regarding some key variables under the new law. And then I also have a few questions. One of the things that I did is I compared the proposed ordinance that you have before you to the ordinance that was passed a year ago, which I guess was the emergency ordinance. And there's two major changes. And I'm not sure that they were highlighted or emphasized as much as probably they should be, in my opinion. One has to do with the concept of what's called residence replacement parking. And what that is when you convert your garage into an ADU. The two spaces, usually two spaces that were required by code for residents, under our emergency ordinance, you had to replace those. You still had to have two off-street parking spaces. Under the proposal that you have before you, if your house is within a half a mile of a bus stop, which is almost probably most of the homes in the RLD9 districts, according to what you have before you, that home will not have to replace that garage parking. So if you live within a half mile of a bus stop and you put in an ADU, not only do you not have to have provide off-street parking for the ADU, the current requirement for you to have off-street parking for your two cars is gone. So what you'll have is 3 cars on the street, theoretically. And you can see this, let me point this out very specifically, because there was language that was struck. And that's on the ordinance, page 10. And at the bottom of page 10, and I won't give you this section, is Section I, parking, and this thing's a little hard to read, but maybe you have a color version. I don't have a color version. But at the bottom there, Section 4 was a section that's now strikeout that required off-street parking for the primary unit must be replaced elsewhere on the subject property. Okay, that was the 2 cars there in the garage. That section is now stricken. And it's not, and maybe I'm misinterpreting this, and that's fine, but that point is not made in the staff report. So maybe I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong on this, because in the staff report, this issue, it says that there are no changes to parking spaces required for the primary dwelling. But that's not consistent with the ordinance. Now, I don't know whether that's optional or not. There's been a lot of law changes that have happened. What I passed out was what I downloaded this afternoon from the State Housing and Community Development, their FAQs. And I don't know whether this is up to date or not. I couldn't really tell. But there's an FAQ on this concept of replacement parking. Is replacement parking required when the parking area for the primary structure is used for an ADU? In other words, a garage conversion. And the answer is yes, but only if the local government requires off-street parking to be replaced. So I don't know if this is optional or not. If this is optional, then I would think we want to still require off-street parking when the garages are taken off. The second major change has to do with the maximum size of the ADUs. The current emergency ordinance has a maximum size of 800 feet, and the revised proposed ordinance that you have increased that to 1,200 feet. And so again, do we have to go to 1,200 feet per the new law, or is 800 feet still an option? Again, on the FAQs, it said that the typical maximum unit sizes can range from 800 feet to 1,200 feet. A local government may choose a maximum unit size less than 1,200 feet, as long as this requirement is not burdensome on the creation of ADUs. So that would be another question. If that's discretionary, between 800 and 1,200 feet, then we need to have a discussion about that. Reducing it to 800 feet would reduce impacts on the community, would reduce parking impacts. So it's definitely something we need to discuss if it's an option, and maybe it's not under the new law. Finally, I would like to know whether having a minimum lot size where ADUs can be placed as an option. And I say that because this ordinance will apply to the RLD 15 neighborhood, which is my neighborhood in Bridgeport. And I thought that was fine until, I read this thing about the garage parking not having to be replaced. That would definitely impact our neighborhood. And so one of the questions I have is, could the city have a minimum lot size? In other words, for example, lots less than 5,000 feet wouldn't be able to do it, or pick some other number. And I ask that because, again, in this FAQ, one of these FAQs mentioned that Santa Cruz has set a minimum lot size requirement of 4,500 square feet. And apparently that's okay. So that, again, if that's a discretionary option that we have, then I think we should have a discussion of that. The other district that may affect, besides the the RMD 15, is the RMD 18 district, which actually you have, Patty, I think that's the only one I think is up in your neighborhood along Lamson. Those townhomes, that's actually an RMD 18, and they're gonna be allowed to do this in that area.
That's Parkwood. I used to live there.
Yeah.
That's
So,
Parkwood?
so-
Parkwood's not part of Seal Beach.
Oh, no, that's right. That's not.
Or it's
That's
Los
Los
Alamitos.
okay, but there's an RMD 18
Now we have
next to the,
ranch-
Never mind.
We have the Old Ranch Townhomes.
right,
That's part of Seal Beach.
right, and that's RMD
Or
18,
College Park East.
right.
But Parkwood is across the street,
Okay.
and it's part of LaSalle.
All right.
So-
Mr. Goldberg, we
yeah.
let you go over a little bit, so
Okay.
if you want to wrap it up.
Yeah, well, the other thing questions just real quick. How does this apply to areas that have CC&Rs and neighborhood associations such as Bridgeport and Heron Point? Well, how does it interface with that? And then the lot coverage question from Ms. Campbell. If a part of a lot is used for parking, does that count as lot coverage or not? That's my question. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goldberg. Very good. Anyone else like to step up and have something to say? All right, seeing no one, we're closing the comment period for this item.
I have a question. Robert mentioned an ADU
Yield the floor to
of your
Commissioner
garage.
Campbell.
Huh?
Yes, you may go ahead.
Okay. Robert mentioned an ADU is in a garage. I thought ADUs were additional units attached to the house or the property.
No, and the staff report talks about turning the garage into an ADU. So
Attached conversion.
So they can,
maybe we could ask, I share your concern, Patty. Maybe Crystal, if I
Sure.
could pose a question, because a concern is that that say one day down the road, half of the homes on my block have garages with people living in them. Is that something that the state law says we must allow?
In a short word, yes. The regulations allow for residents to convert their garages to an ADU. They would have to meet all of the building code requirements. A garage obviously was never built to be habitable space. There would have to be plans to show how the foundation will be reinforced, how insulation will be placed in there, how the garage itself would be converted into a habitable living space, but the replacement parking is still something that we can require, and that is one of the things that I pointed out when I was giving my report, is that our prior urgency ordinance required if you're converting your garage into an ADU, you have to replace it with another garage somewhere else on the property. The only thing that we're not allowed to do now under the newer legislation is require a garage. If you're converting your garage into an ADU, you still are required to provide 2 parking spaces to replace those somewhere else on the property itself, but we can't require it to be an enclosed garage. You can just have open parking. So if you convert the garage and you have space in your driveway in front of the garage, that's your required 2-car parking.
And so even though now you technically would have more habitants in your house, you wouldn't have to add any parking,
That's correct.
as long as you have parking in your driveway for 2 vehicles. Amy?
Yes, that's correct. I just wanted to clarify, because Dr. Goldberg asked about whether you have to replace parking. The state law makes a distinction between parking for the primary unit and parking for the ADU. And the provisions that say you cannot require parking if you're within half a mile of public transit, et cetera, those 4 exceptions that Crystal read off, that applies to the parking for an ADU. But what the state law says is if you demolish a garage or you convert a garage that's been used as parking for the primary unit, you can require that parking for the primary unit be replaced. And if you look at page 12 of your staff report, of the draft ordinance, and I don't know if Dr. Goldberg, you have this, it's down at the bottom of page 12. The language that he read off that was deleted is at the top of page 13. That was the old language that the urgency ordinance put in. So what we did is we quoted verbatim what the new state law says, and that's down at the bottom of page 12. If I'm going too fast, just tell me to stop.
I'm there.
Okay, so what it says on page 12 is when you demolish a carport or garage or carport, a covered parking structure to have an ADU, then you have to replace the parking for the primary unit. And as Crystal emphasized, we can no longer require that they build a new garage or a new carport. If there's room on their driveway, if they can do some sort of tandem parking, we have to allow them to do that so that the primary unit parking does not go away.
Okay, so, I live on the hill, and all of our homes have 2-car garages typically, and some more, but I mean, two-car garages and 2 spots out in the driveway. So if I wanted to, I could say, okay, I want to rent out my garage to, of course, try to alleviate the housing crisis in California. And anyways, I could convert my garage, meet all the current codes and all that kind of stuff, and just park the 2 cars out on the driveway. And because there's a bus stop within half a mile, then the city needs to allow this. That's pretty much what the state law says we must allow this.
Yes.
Okay.
And just so you understand, there was pending legislation that did not get adopted that would have even restricted further. They would have eliminated the ability of cities to require lot coverage standards, as an example. So this is nowhere near as bad as we were concerned. In fact, that's one of the reasons why this didn't come to you till now, because we were waiting to see if the legislature was going to adopt something even more strict, which they didn't.
I have 2 questions, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, please.
The first question is along the lines of what Dr. Goldberg mentioned was, in terms of unit size, do we have discretion in terms of limiting the amount from 1,200 to 800 square feet, for example, or not?
The new law says that it can't exceed 1,200 square feet. If we wanted to limit the size, I think you'd have to have some very specific findings to justify why you're doing that. There's also a junior accessory dwelling unit law now, which we did not address in here, but there's a set of standards for those which are smaller. That is not, but the reduction below the 1,200 was not something that we were asked to look at. I mean, we basically made this consistent with what state law says. And since the goal of the law is to create more housing, you would have to have some standards to justify, or findings to justify that, because this ordinance has to go to HCD. And if you're limiting the availability of second units, you have to be able to justify why you're
Could we, I'm just going to follow up with this. Could you, for example, use a standard of only one bedroom and one bathroom and so on for each equivalent, or for each additional dwelling unit or not? I mean, does it have to be a two-bedroom? Can it be a one-bedroom? Can it be a studio? I mean, can you apply those standards?
Well, the size, what you have to have for habitable space is based on housing code and building code.
But you could limit it, could you limit it to a one-bedroom addition instead
No.
of like a two-bedroom addition? Or, you know, in other words,
Mr. Chair, if I may jump into that as well. From the
Yes.
city's perspective, when we took a look at the legislation that was being presented to us, we looked through it to see what was available to us. The only language that we kept seeing was the 1,200 square foot threshold. It didn't give us allowances to limit it to the number of bedrooms. It didn't allow us to, there was nothing when we read through it several times that said any number other than the 1,200 square feet. So it wasn't something that we were able to do. We looked at other areas wherever we thought we would be able to make any type of finding. Again, the entire time we were looking at this, we had the intent to try to preserve the neighborhoods that we currently have. But we feel what we have right now, that was the maximum allowed for us with the legislation that's presented.
yeah, if I can just ask another question, I'm sorry, I don't mean to hog that. I was a little surprised, and I totally understand it, but I just want to confirm it, that there's no notice requirement. Your next door neighbor could pull a permit and build this structure without you even knowing about it until it's been framed up and basically ready to be occupied. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Wow. That's pretty amazing to
I
me.
noticed the same thing.
It's too bad.
If I could ask a question, I'm sorry, do you have?
I'm done. That's fine.
All right, thank you, Victor. So you mentioned this already, but I do want to confirm this, because we're being asked to, I think, more or less recommend approval of an ordinance that certainly a lot of us don't believe serves, is best suited for our community, but is required by law. So I guess my first question, well, it's to planning and to legal, is this the absolute minimum that we can, I mean, let me say this, you explained that we exempted Old Town, you explained that we exempted Surfside. Is this, as you look at what law was passed by our state, is this the minimum that we need to do in order to comply?
In my opinion, this is the bare minimum that we're required to do. And I believe, again, like Amy was describing earlier, in order to make any type of change to what the legislature was requiring, we have to have significant findings. And the primary basis for those have to be on some type of life safety, which is why the only reason we're allowed to exclude Old Town and Surfside is just because of the congestion and then the narrow setbacks that they currently have. So because of the existing condition in those areas, we believe we're able to make the findings for that. Unfortunately, because the rest of our residential areas are a little more typical single-family residential neighborhoods, it was very difficult. And believe me, Amy can let you know, we had lots of back and forth discussions with the urgency ordinance and then going through this, trying to figure out what the best course of action was going to be for this community, because we didn't want to bring something to you that we didn't think was necessary.
And so I also, and thank you, Crystal, really it's more a question for legal though too, is, not having read the law from front to back, we're kind of taking this on, on staff's recommendation, which is use. So maybe could you kind of give the legal side of that?
Well, the state legislature is very clear that they want to come up with ways of increasing the supply of housing. And they have focused on making it easier for people who own property to add either an attached accessory dwelling unit or a detached accessory dwelling unit on their property. And to clarify for Commissioner Campbell, it can be attached or detached. And we used to call them granny flats, then we called them second units, and now we call them accessory dwelling units. It's all the same thing. As I said, the legislature was looking at even more strict, restrictive limitations on what cities could do, and to your benefit, they did not adopt that. But what has been put together here basically tracks the state legislation, and if you want to be creative and ask, can we do X, Y, and Z? It may be something we haven't thought of. And we would say, no, you can, or maybe you could. We have to look at that. But pretty much this tracks what the state law allows us to do.
Thank you, Amy. Yes.
I guess
Yeah.
I kind of want to touch on some things that like Joyce and Robert said, as well as Commissioner Gargis. The 1,200 foot maximum seems a bit vague, because my concern would be this, and it was something that Joyce had mentioned as well, is that these units would be turned into even multi-units within themselves. So if we're worried and concerned about parking and all that stuff, but we could put two different separate residential units in a 1,200 square feet, as long as that is within the standards. So I'm wondering, there's nothing that says that we can't restrict it to an occupancy level as well. So in theory, they could put 4 300-foot units or 300 square foot units. I mean, we're talking about like recovery houses, somebody who wants someplace to sleep. It's a bed and in a unit. Could that potentially happen?
I think we don't want to get into recovery houses, because that's a whole separate issue. I'll let Crystal talk about the 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, et cetera, but traditionally occupancy is a very difficult area for cities to regulate in, because occupancy is determined under the building code and the housing code. And I don't know if any of you remember, but years ago there was an effort to limit the number of students who could live in housing near universities. And there's a very famous case in Santa Barbara where the Supreme Court of California said if 12 people want to live together as a family, they're not related, but if they want to live as a family, you city cannot restrict that, even if you think the occupancy level is too high. So what the city can do is look at lot coverage issues. 1,200 may be the maximum, but if the lot is already up to whatever the lot coverage standard is for that zone, they may not be able to add an accessory dwelling unit. So that's the kind of interplay that when staff gets something, they would be looking at. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, Amy's correct. Whenever we get an application, and like I was speaking with Commissioner Aguilar, whenever we get an application, we look at every single plan, application, whatever it is. We look at it independently. We're trying to see what the potential is, what's going to happen, what we believe we're able to do within there. So particularly with an accessory dwelling unit, if it looks like they're putting in 2 separate exterior entryways, or if it looks like there's a potential to create or do something when we walk away after permits are final, those are things we are going to be looking for. Again, because we are very concerned about the parking requirements, about what's happening, the density in these areas. The density requirements can't apply to these lots because they're just accessory dwelling units. They're not another dwelling unit. That's why they changed the phrasing. Instead of second unit, it's an accessory unit. There's a lot of new issues that we're going to be dealing with, and unfortunately that our residents are going to have to learn how to deal with when these start showing up in their areas. We, at this point, haven't had the impact that other cities have had with regard to these types of dwelling units. But it's something that we are trying to make sure that we have a hold of. It's something that we're trying to make sure we're presenting clearly to the commission, to the council, to the public, so everyone's aware of what these regulations are, what we're going to be looking at, what we're facing. With regard to the half-mile requirement, that's another item. It's not, the way that we look at that isn't just a bird's eye aerial view from the residence to the mass transit stop. It's the legislature theorizes that this person is going to be walking from the ADU to the bus stop. So we do a street route and measure out whether that is within a half mile. Oftentimes, because you're going around different blocks and corners, they think it's a half mile and it's not within a half mile, so parking would have to be required. So wherever we're allowed to apply these provisions, we're going to be applying these provisions.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Commissioner Campbell.
Okay, I'm concerned with the garages and the impact this could have on College Park East. We all know everybody uses their garages to store stuff. God bless those people that put 2 cars in their garage, okay? I've got 1 car in my garage, so I'm halfway there. But right now, if you are not permitted to build a permanent structure in your garage, the garage has to be ready to put a car in. In other words, most of us could just haul all our junk out and put the 2 cars in. So you're not permitted to build excessive storage areas in the garage where you can't put a permanent structure in the garage. Because we had an incident where a woman was doing that and the building inspector drove by and saw it and said, you can't do that. Whatever you put in your garage can't be permanent. You got to be able to take it out. Now, I'm not saying you can't build cabinets, but you have to be able to, on the side, but you have to be able to get 2 cars in if you hold all your junk out. Well, what you're saying now with this is people can go ahead and put permanent structures in their garage. Okay? I know of one gentleman who uses his garage as his office, but nothing is permanent there. If he had to, he could haul it all out and put 2 cars in. But when you start building permanent structures, you start building storage units and such in a garage, now you can't just haul everything out. You got to demolish it. Distinction there. So what this does now is this allows people to basically legally build what they want in their garage.
No.
Okay?
Well,
An accessory dwelling unit, yes,
It has-
could be
yeah.
permanently. Yeah, it would only apply to an accessory dwelling unit.
Only if it's an accessory dwelling. Okay.
Correct.
So the existing still holds true, that if somebody wanted to now put some permanent storage boxes or storage facility units within their garage, they still couldn't do that because they're not creating an ADU.
That's correct.
Okay. Because I could see people going, aha.
And what are those minimum requirements for an ADU? It's a kitchen, a bathroom, a bedroom?
Yeah, it would have to be living facilities, so at least a kitchen. It would have to have a full bathroom. It would have to have a sleeping area, so it would be its own habitable space.
Can I just, before I forget, can I add one thing? The question came up about CCNRs and homeowners associations. This ordinance only addresses the city's authority. Whatever issues may exist because of particular provisions in CCNRs, not within the city's purview. So if there are restrictions and somebody feels that there's some state law that those violate, that's as between the homeowners association and the homeowner. It's not something the city would enforce. But again, I have an example of what Commissioner Campbell mentioned where somebody where I live put in a little music soundproofed music area, and they had to rip it out when
'Cause it's
they
permanent.
sold their house because it couldn't be permanent.
That's right.
But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an actual ADU, and again, if they take away some or all of that garage, the parking that should have been in there, the two-car garage, has to be able to be replaced somewhere on that lot legally. And if they can't replace it, then they can't have that ADU.
Can somebody legally convert their garage to an additional bedroom?
No. It would have to be its own accessory dwelling unit, so it would have to function as its own.
Okay, they would have to, in other words, the only way they could convert it is by put a kitchen and bathroom facilities in it, but they could not put, I'm thinking of, because we did have one house down the street from us, we had two families living in this one house, and there was a couple living in the garage, and, you know, you could open the garage door and there they were. But I'm just wondering if a family could legally convert the garage into a bedroom.
No, for the accessory dwelling unit, they'd have to have their own exterior entrance, and it would have to be
Okay.
completely separated from the primary.
Okay, just throwing these out, being devil's advocate.
Can I ask a question? Have we done research with other cities that have, I mean, it's obvious, I'm sure we're not alone here in not wanting our neighborhoods turning into multi-unit dwellings. Is there any research that we did into other approaches other cities have looked at, any kind of creative ways of maybe limiting what can and can't be done? Is there anything that's been done in that area? Because again, I always come back to, we're being asked to pretty much recommend passing a zoning change that really we, or I can't speak for everybody, that I'm not real fond of. So can I ask that question? Is there anything going on out there in the planning world?
Well, there are definitely cities, and everybody is approaching it, I guess, the best way that they can with what is in front of them. Some cities have tried to be a little more restrictive with how they're adopting their ordinances, and a lot of those cities have ended up getting challenges, and they end up with a lot of other things that they're dealing with, and they're having to make amendments, and a lot of what they adopted aren't being upheld. So again, these are some of the things that we've been discussing, and when it comes to the findings, believe me, Amy and I have had lots of conversations about what kind of findings we're going to be able to make to support whatever we're trying to do. With the urgency ordinance, the original time this came around, we took advantage of every single thing that we could, and I think a lot of cities did, which is probably why the follow-up legislation took those away, and this is what we have in front of us now.
Are we on any kind of schedule crunch here?
We have to be compliant. We have to meet all of the requirements of the new legislation, and I believe that's,
By January 1.
yeah.
By January 1?
And basically, if we don't comply, something that's inconsistent will be deemed void.
May I ask another question? I didn't see anything in the ordinance concerning fees. Tell me what the fee structure is for someone that comes in for a accessory dwelling unit. Do they pay school fees? Do they pay, I mean, are they assessed just like a new building would be assessed? Even a garage conversion, are they going to pay a school fee for that?
Absolutely. They're adding a new unit to the housing stock, so they would have to pay all of the applicable fees that go along with that. The plan check fees, the permit fees, all of the school fees, the park fees, everything that goes, well, I'd have to check with Amy on whether or not the park fee would apply to that, but everything else is definitely going to apply.
Right. Thank you, Crystal. What do you guys think?
This is a tough one. I mean, I'm grateful that Old Town is impacted, to be honest with you, and we're off the hook.
That's the good news.
We're off the hook, yeah, we're off the hook. So for Surfside as well, but, this is really a painful one because
Not open right
it's
now.
unfortunate.
Public comment.
I'm just wondering.
The biggest problems I see here is that there's a huge economic incentive to convert a garage. And you can do it basically without telling anybody about it except for city staff. I want to do this. If you can't stop them from doing it if they can meet the code requirements. Yeah, there has to be a permanent, the owner has to be an owner occupant of one of those units, but I mean, I just see enforcement being a nightmare going down the road here. Because it was a nightmare in Old Town for many years, and it still is. There's still I'm sure, examples here of converted garages that have never been caught, quote unquote. But, we're between a rock and a hard spot. I mean, unless we're prepared to fight this in some way or to, to try to set standards that maybe will pass muster, what choice do we have? I mean, I feel like we got a gun to our head here, is basically where we're at.
This can change the whole tenor of a neighborhood.
No question. I mean, the Hill and College Park East could be completely different than we know it today.
Oh, yeah. You're going to end up with mixed developments. You're going to have mixed use. You're not talking about residential and commercial. I'm talking about you're going to have low density with medium density. And it changes the parking, becomes a nightmare.
That'd be terrible.
Yeah, let me, if I could. I mean, again, I understand that we're being asked to pass something here that meets the law. But I'm going to propose, because if I'm going to go ahead and say yes on this, I got to make sure that I've got all my homework done, and I have to feel really good about it. I mean, I'm going to propose that we continue and we continue this item, and that I'm going to ask staff, and I hate to do this, but ask staff to do some research and come back to us with some examples of maybe what anyone anywhere is doing that's creative that could limit kind of our exposure to these garage conversions, universally being allowed throughout our neighborhoods. Because that's kind of how I look at it. I mean, if, we can't look, I understand that our elected state officials have said this is a potential solution to the housing crisis that we all know about and hear about. But I feel it is my duty as representative of the Hill community that I have got to feel really good about that we are doing absolutely everything that we possibly can to limit the impacts of this law upon our community. So, yes, Ms. Grayson.
Well, just a comment and a question. Because of the timing issues, I think staff's perspective would be, we would prefer that you take an action and provide comments or requests for staff when it's presented to the city council of those things that you would like to be addressed, if possible, consistent with the law. That's my comment. And then my question would be, when you say how we can limit garage conversions, what kind of restriction, in your perfect world, what kind of restriction would you be thinking about for the city to be able to say, you can't convert your garage? Because from the perspective of the state legislation, if they can provide the substitute parking for the primary unit, and the city can't require extra parking for the new ADU, what is your goal or your concern other than stopping the conversion itself?
I don't really know. And that's why I'm asking staff to I'm not creative enough to sit here and come up with those things as I sit here, frankly. But I'm sure there have been other people smarter than me who have thought about this a lot more than me, who have come up with some ideas in this area. And that's what I'm asking staff to look into. I mean, like I said, I can't sit here and say, I can tell you what I know. I know that I don't want every house on Fathom Avenue in Seal Beach to have an ADU. I know that. And I know that, I want you guys to do the homework for me. Now, I'm sorry that this has a January 1st date. but I would like to see this a little sooner if that was, I'm not going to let
Chairperson,
that date kind of drive me on this.
No, I understand. For us, though, we do want to make sure that we are remaining in compliance. One of the things that I wanted to ask, similar to what Amy was saying, tonight I've heard different questions. Can we require a minimum lot size? Can we limit the number of bedrooms? Can we have smaller maximum size requirements? Would the commission consider directing staff and legal counsel to go and take a look at cities that have tried to venture down these routes to determine what their success or what their challenges have been? If we can identify those in comments added to the resolution and present all of that to the city council along with any other creative things we may find, the presentation to the city council will include an evaluation of these items along with any other items that we've found in our research with the other cities. That way we are addressing the concerns, and believe me, the very valid concerns that you have, and we are presenting it in a public forum, but we're keeping the timeline so that the city council would have the discretion to make that determination.
So you're asking us to approve it with the contingencies.
Absolutely.
So we have another meeting in 2 weeks, or at least that doesn't seem like a significantly large amount of time.
Yeah, I personally, I like being part of the conversation rather than kick it to council.
I'm sorry, but you need to notice this for the city council,
Exactly.
right? So
We need
you're running into timeframe requirements under the law for noticing purposes in order to meet the compliance.
We need to
I gotta
provide.
say, if I may, just for a second, I'm okay with what you're suggesting, which is we're really just advising you on this ordinance to begin with. But our advice is you need to do a little more research along the lines of what the chairman is speaking of and the issues that you've raised, and let the council sort it out. But really, from my standpoint, we have to be more restrictive than less restrictive if we can all possibly do it, because it's just too huge an incentive to let people just go, I'm going to convert my garage into a 3-bedroom. A 1,200 square foot is 3-bedroom. I know, because I lived in a 1,200 square foot that was 3-bedroom. And that would be a nightmare. That would be minimum probably 4 cars on the street, maybe more.
And parking.
So there's got to be a way that we can, I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm not an attorney, and certainly the state has got their rules and so on, but this is really crazy. To allow something like that just to happen without being able to further microscopically figure out how we can minimize the impacts.
Yeah, and
Parking
go on,
is-
Mary Ann, please.
Yeah, I'd like to know if there's any way of telling what the, the rate of this kind of conversion, what is expected or what have other communities seen? Because the idea of granny units has been around a lot. What is it looking like? People are worrying if it's your whole neighborhood. Is that likely? What are we really looking? Is there any way of telling that to the city council as well?
It's a little bit different in the comparison, and this community definitely is different than a lot of other communities. The granny flats and the second dwelling units, I believe, and you're correct, they've been around for a very long time at this point. And I believe one of the reasons why more people didn't follow along with that is because cities were allowed to require a garage space, one garage space for that unit. And I think that's why they're coming now and they're taking that away from us. They're taking a lot away from us so that it's easier for people to come in and try to add these on. Since the urgency ordinance has been in place, we've had 2 applications. And so since 2016 to now, we've had 2 applications come in for accessory dwelling units. One, I believe, was approved. The other is under review.
Yeah, but they had to have parking in order to be able to do it beforehand.
Were
So-
those garage conversions or a new addition? I'm just curious.
It was a conversion of the I'm sorry?
I was going to say currently they're both under review still. One is a garage conversion and the other one is a conversion of the existing house.
Okay, so if I could bring this back, thank you, everyone. So if I could figure out what's being proposed here, and I'm kind of following along with what Commissioner Gerges says, is that what you're asking is if we are willing to make a motion to recommend are we recommending the ordinance, or are we recommending the research being done and then presented to council for them to decide what to do with it?
It would be both. You would recommend approval of the resolution with the added condition that staff provide a full analysis to the council regarding the 3 items listed and any additional restrictive provisions that we're able to find in our research.
And what is the reason for preferring that route to just asking you to come back to us with recommendations?
When we notice for any public hearing, particularly any item that's gone to Planning Commission and then to the City Council, when we send our notification to the paper, it has to include what the vote and what the decision was by the Planning Commission, and it's going to be heard by the City Council. If we wait till our next meeting, I don't believe we'll have enough time to send that notification out with the vote so that it can be heard by the City Council at their December meeting, because there's only one December meeting for the City Council.
I think we've just barely scratched the surface of this whole issue. One of the things that concerns me is the parking, because it says as long as you can provide parking like on the driveway. Well, we're in residential areas, kids, and some of them are driving. At one point, I had 3 kids, we had 6 cars, 2 in the garage, 2 on the driveway, 1 in front of the house, and the other one parked wherever they could. And now you're going to say you can put those 2 cars on the driveway. Where are you displacing 2 cars that were already on the driveway? See, that's the problem.
And I can tell you, the issue I have, Patty, is that, there's people with 6 cars with 2 people, and that's fine.
No.
If you
It's
live in
5 people.
Part of the culture or the feel or if you want to say, our neighborhood is a neighborhood where you have homes with garages, and that is what contributes to the overall kind of just how the feel of our neighborhood is.
Mm-hmm.
If we start eliminating that, and we now have,
That's right.
and conceivably, you don't know what the future is going to hold, right? I mean, who knows what happens because of economic conditions, because of overcrowding, because of, I don't know, even global warming. But there could be just this massive kind of movement to turn people's garages into, apartments, so that, it just could become a trend, and then everyone starts doing it. And I don't think that's who we want to be as the city of Seal Beach, frankly. And I know that's not who we want to be on the Hill.
Condos with
So,
limited families.
I don't know. I take issue because, I feel like I'm being rushed through this because we're just seeing this right now, and it's the end of the year.
Now we have 3 vehicles
And-
plus 1 in the garage.
I'm sorry, Patty?
Sorry, we're having a side conversation.
I feel like I'm being rushed through this to kind of kick this off, to kind of get it through planning so that it can get done by the end of the year. But I don't feel, frankly, that I'm particularly well informed and prepared to make a decision. So that's kind of where I am right now.
Would there be any financial fine or anything for the city if we don't have something by the 1st?
It would not be a financial fine, but if we don't have an ordinance approved by January 1st,
Then we can never
then
do
the
one?
state legislature takes precedent over our existing
Until we pass
code.
something, though. So we could go into January by a couple weeks and be fine as long as we pass something eventually.
Somebody could come in the first week of January, submit plans that comply with state legislature, so they can apply for an ADU in Old Town because our code doesn't allow for it. We don't have anything in place.
It's either ours or theirs.
And believe me, this is something that we've been wanting to bring to you earlier in the year, but like Amy mentioned, the legislature keeps providing new proposals and different items. We had a very strong fear that lot coverage was going to be taken away from the provisions that we're able to apply. So we had to wait until all of that was getting through to see what we were going to be left with, and this is what we're presenting to you tonight. I absolutely understand this is a lot that is being presented to you and asked of you in one night, which is why we're hoping that the recommendation and the compromise that we're asking for, we will take the direction, we will do the research, and we will include all of that in the presentation to the City Council. But we are asking to move forward so that we can meet the timelines.
Well, let me ask this, okay, because I want to work with you. So to the Hill, if we're complying with what the law is. So if someone comes in and gives you some plans to check, you're going to be checking against state law, which is going to agree with our ordinance. So I'm not really terribly worried about that. However, I am interested in protecting our friends in Surfside and in Old Town. So is there somewhere in the middle that we can meet where we kind of take care of that part of the business and then take care of the rest of the business later? Does that make any sense? And I know I'm putting a lot back on you guys on planning staff, but
I believe that it's coming back and that we have to work on it is absolutely not anything that we're worried about. We've spent time on it. We don't mind at all looking into it further. We are always trying to find a way to help improve this as best as we can. That is absolutely not the problem. The ordinance itself, I mean, the amendments are there. There's no way to separate a piece of the ordinance the way it's presented right now. We, again, would have to come back at a separate meeting to separate out one ordinance that does part of it and then another ordinance that does another part of it, which doesn't meet the timeline that we're trying to meet.
Okay, well, let me ask this. So if we do say what you said and we go ahead and we approve the ordinance right now, with subject to this research being performed by staff and presented to council, and then be presented back to us at our next meeting, we can always, based on things learned, lessons learned. I don't know. Council may say, hey, we don't think planning commission's doing their job. They're just kicking the can to us. That's not our intention, by the way. I don't believe. But anyways, if we do learn something as a body, planning commission, can we propose that the ordinance be updated after that?
Yeah, brilliant minds think alike. That's
the first time I've been called that in a while, but okay.
I was actually just thinking along those lines. There is nothing to prevent staff from coming back to you, and if you requested that staff come back to you and that we tell the city council, look, okay, we'll recommend this, but we would like council to direct that it come back to the planning commission to see if there is anything further that we can do to strengthen this. Because that would at least have in place what is the minimum. It will be something in there. It will deal with the areas we know we are really concerned about. And then we would come back to you and report, we've come up with this, or no, we can't do X, Y, and Z. But at least we will come back to you and you will know that we will be coming back to you.
Okay. So I'd like the record to reflect that if we do recommend this, it's because of the necessary provisions that really protect those communities. But we do want to see that research done. We'd like that presented to council as such, to look at ways of restricting and tightening what is allowed under the current law, and I'd like to see what other communities are doing to address this situation. So like I say, I'd like that research done in advance of going to council, and then also for what those recommendations are, be brought back to us for a staff report for consideration to incorporate into the ordinance if council doesn't already kind of take care of all that business. That's why we would consider it. Because you may learn something and council may say, hey, great, that sounds great, we're going to go ahead and approve it. And then you come back to us and we say, okay, we're all on board here, but we want to be part of the process. That's what my concern is. Does that make any sense? That's a whole lot of stuff there. Is that a motion?
You can
No, I
say
still have
that's my
comment.
motion.
Okay, all right, but before I make any kind of motion, Commissioner Aguirre, you'd like to say something?
I think there's a lot riding on this, and I think for us to, and I won't use the term kicking it down the road, but I think we're passing this on with a lot more questions than we think. Yeah, we want to put restrictions on it, but there's so many X factors that haven't been addressed, and I believe that we would be irresponsible to pass it on to council without at least looking at it more. And I don't think that's a long process. I think it could take a couple of days to just really look into alternatives and solutions. I represent College Park West, and they're very close to Cal State Long Beach. there would be concern I would have, I'm sure that people in that neighborhood would have for people converting for students and being overrun with student housing in that area. And I want to be able to say, at least to the constituents there, that there's something preventing that from happening and getting out of control. And so I'm going to vote no on passing it forward for that reason, because I believe that we, as a government body, and we have a bigger responsibility to our constituents to make sure that we foresee any problems that could happen. And in this case, I think there's too many to say yes and just pass it down the road.
Okay,
I'd like to say something.
your point is all made. Please, go on.
I would rather that we have things that our staff has come up with for our city than to just leave us at the mercy of the state legislation. It sounds like if it's possible to get more information before the city council, that's a good deal. And it also sounds like if we're coming back to us to hear that we can make changes later. But it seems to me that it's really important for us to get at least this part in before the state law kicks in. That will kick in, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, and I'm with you, Marianne. I think that's very well stated. So I'm going to go ahead and make a motion.
Can we continue this?
Well, see, we talked about continuing it. If we continue it, we can't get the posting and all that done in order to pass an ordinance by the end of the
Well,
year.
I'd like to have more input from the residents. I mean, we are this just has hit us, and to me, it seems like it's being rushed through.
I agree.
This did
So for
Here, write up something about it, and get people to come on down. If you gave it that shot and they don't show, then we have to make a decision.
So for clarification for Commissioner Campbell, what the discussion was, what I was understanding is that if there is a motion and a vote to move the resolution and recommend approval of the ordinance forward to the city council, there is also a requirement for staff to do additional research, present all of that information to the city council, and also request that the city council direct staff to bring it back to the planning commission if they choose to adopt the ordinance, to then bring it back to the planning commission for further review and analysis to determine if there are additional items. That way we'll meet the timeline for when the legislation is enacted. We have something in place, and we have more time to add or tweak or do whatever we believe we'd be able to do, as long as the findings are going to be there.
Yeah, and I think Commissioner Campbell is right on, is that I'm not sure everybody knows in our community what
the impacts are
what we're
gonna be.
seeing right
Yeah.
here. And so part of this is, there's two things one thing I'd like to ask is, you mentioned having council recommend it come back to us for review and consideration, to have a similar forum like this after council passes this almost sounds like another emergency resolution to get it in by the end of the year so that we don't face certain consequences, right? I mean, we're not going to call it that, but it sounds like that's what we're doing. That's almost the only way I think we can approach this.
Right now, we're trying to make sure that we have some permanent ordinance in place so that we meet the deadline for the new legislation when that comes into
And that's
effect.
January 1, as I understand it?
Yes.
And just, if I may, what is the noticing requirements now for public hearing with the council?
10 days prior to the council meeting, and we would send the notification to the paper the week prior to that.
So the meeting is December 10, which means what's your deadline to the newspaper?
You're going to get hung up in the holidays.
The
That's right. Well,
22nd.
they won't have a second meeting, that's the problem. So it has to be December 10th, right? So,
Does this have to be done by the end of the year?
yeah, January 1st.
Does, or else the law just kicks in
Otherwise, the
universally
state law
across the whole
takes
city.
effect.
That's the issue.
And we don't get a say-so.
Yeah, we don't.
If I may,
Yeah,
I concur, I concur with planning staff recommendation. I mean, really, all we can do right now is forward it to the council with our concerns, right? And with the desire for staff to do additional research on ways that we can further restrict, I'm going to use that word out loud, restrict this from happening, okay? And then if the council decides to take action and to approve it because they're under the gun like everybody else, then they can so do. If they want to send it back to us for further consideration, they can do that as well. I think from an informational standpoint, it would be nice to get something back anyway, just to see what everybody's agreed to, right? But I don't see how you get it done unless you move it tonight. You got to do it tonight.
Well, let me ask this is, again, if can we actually move to have this brought before us again after council acts?
As a requirement?
We don't need to ask them to send it back to us. We can say, we want the staff report and we want the opportunity for the community to be able to comment on this at that time.
We can absolutely schedule it back for the planning commission. We can provide an update and we can ask the public to participate. We can, and one of the reasons why I was saying ask the council to direct staff back is whether or not they wanted it to be in a workshop forum where we try to have it more where there is more public involvement, if we wanted to direct it back so that it is just another item that's presented to the commission. That's what I meant when I was saying I would ask council for direction to bring it back to the planning commission.
But then procedurally, how does that go? So it comes back to us, and then what, we kick it back to city council for finalization? I mean, we're talking about stretching it out now to 4 meetings.
So again, the intent right now of moving it forward so that the council can take some type of action at their December meeting is so that hopefully, in staff's hope, we will have something in place, something adopted, so that we meet the January 1st deadline. After that, when we bring it back to the planning commission, that is where we can try to further refine if there was anything that we were able to find, or if there are any new ideas that the public or the commission wants us to look forward to. What I would actually think in that regard is if, when we present to the city council, if there is something that we were able to find that they were able to incorporate in and do that, we'd bring it back and provide the commission with an update. If there was nothing that we were able to provide, but we still ask city council to direct it back to the planning commission so we can do further studies, have further discussion. And at that point, it would probably be more of a workshop type of setting to see if there's any new ideas that can be brought on that we can go back, take a research at, and then come back with a new amendment for, if that's something that we can do. So you're correct. If we're not able to find something immediately for the city council, they don't incorporate something in there, then it could be a longer process. We'll be bringing it back. We will be having the commission involved more in the amendments and the procedures and in what's being presented. If we're able to incorporate something, then the council may just want us to come back with an update, and then at that point, the planning commission can determine what the next step would be.
If we get Charles to write this up in detail in the Sun, that's one way to get it to the people.
Well, we can't really direct the Sun what to write.
No, I know we can't, but
I'd like my picture
Charles,
on the
you're
front
here.
page with the
Chair
headline.
Thomas,
you're here in the interest of public service.
I just want to make, I
I'm
just
sorry,
wanted to make it clear.
Ms. Roberts?
Yes, I just wanted to make it clear to the commission that a public hearing notice was placed in the paper for this item, so the public has been notified. I know we've talked about public participation, so I didn't want our viewing audience to think that we hadn't already done that
Sure,
public
sure.
notice
Yeah,
process.
And I didn't want to imply that. Thank you, Robin. I appreciate that clarification.
I think where the press comes in this situation is that I had to look up ADU when I was reading this, preparing for this meeting. And when you talk about a public announcement to discuss ADUs, 99% of the population is not going to know what that means. They're going to think it's a plumbing thing. I mean, I think having it described in a layman setting to allow people to know that this is something important, that people that, when they read it, they know that they need to come down here and act. And I think just making an announcement is legally compliant, but not effective when we're trying to look at how this is going to affect everybody. And I'm not going to say, Charles, to make sure that you put something in there, but having two important people in our community to come in and discuss this means that it's important enough for others to be aware of and to listen to and to discuss and have an opinion on. And
Yeah, with all due respect.
I want to try to wrap this item up. Victor, do you want to take a shot at kind of a summary of our
I would-
motion, or do you want me
No,
to
I'll
give
just
it
make a
go?
motion. I think the motion would be that the planning commission recommend approval of the ordinance to the city council with the provision that city staff do additional research on on avenues to minimize the impact. That's, I guess, the word I'll use, minimize the impact of potential conversions or additions through either lot coverage, bedroom count, square footage, whatever other items you can throw in there that are worth looking at as a potential way of doing it, garages, whatever. And then that, once the city council has taken action, that the planning commission just bring us back a report indicating what the council's done, and if they want us to do any further work. It's really up to them at that point in time to decide whether they want us to continue to do any additional work on that particular item. But we have a deadline. We have to meet by January 1st, so I'm not for letting this thing dwell. We got to get it done.
And I'll second it.
If I could add with your consent,
Sure.
Victor, is that we require staff to come back at our the next meeting after council takes action to report exactly what your findings were, what council had to say about it, any further research or anything else that we learned at that time for our consideration to be included in a revised ordinance.
When will this go to council?
10th.
So wait, before,
12:10.
Patty, if I could, is that?
That's fine.
That sounds good?
Yeah, I'll accept
That's a
that.
motion?
Yeah, and then
And,
Commissioner Klinger, do
Commissioner
you
Klinger seconded.
re-second the amended?
Yes, I'll second.
Okay, now you can
Is-
have
is there any other
discussion, so
comments,
then.
please?
The only comment was, when does it go to council? Because we
The
were
10th.
talking deadlines.
December 10th.
December 10th, okay. You've got to go that far in advance?
There's
The
no
reason I say
meeting
that
in
is,
November.
we've been having planning commission meetings once a month. We can't have them twice a month if we need to move it forward.
Well, we did the math and it's not going to work out.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments? Anyone? Okay,
Already
let's,
made 'em.
let us vote, please. Okay, and we have 4 yeses and 1 nay. Okay? Did we get that for the record? All right, very good. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, guys. Let's, now I gotta put my glasses back on. Okay, Director's report. Director Landavazo, do you have a report for us?
No items.
No items, very good. Commission concerns. Does anyone have any concerns they'd like to put out there? As chair, I'd like to do a quick shout out to the Los Alamitos High School women's volleyball team that just won CIF Division II, and a shout out to Los Al football, which won their first round CIF game. And, go Griffins. With that, our meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.